This will be for the Kuta Software worksheet, Polynomial Inequalities. All right, so they want us to solve each inequality. And right here is our polynomial. And the inequality symbol is right here. It's going to be greater than or less than. And in some cases, also equal to 0. All right, just some notes before we begin. These are the basic steps to solving nonlinear inequalities. You want to use algebra and get 0 on one side of the inequality. Then you want to factor the expression if necessary. Then you want to find the zeros. Then you want to plug in values of x in between the zeros in order to determine where it is positive or negative. And then finally, you choose the appropriate sections based on the inequality. In other words, if it's greater than, you're going to choose the positive section. If it's less than, you're going to choose the negative section. And if it's equal to 0, you're going to include the zeros in that as well. So you'll see what we mean by this in a moment. All right, so we have this polynomial in factored form, and we want to find out where this is going to be less than 0. Now, we're not going to be solving these graphically. We're going to solve them algebraically, but I want to show you this on the graph before we begin. So I am just going to graph on the online graphing calculator. I'm going to graph y equals this right here and show you what it looks like. All right, y equals x minus 4 times x plus 3. And this is what the graph looks like. All right, and basically what we're doing here, we want to find the zeros. And we're not doing this graphically. I'm just showing you on the graph. The zeros will be the x-intercepts right here and right here. Okay, so we're going to find these points algebraically. And then what we're going to do is plug in points in between the 0 to see where the graph is negative or positive. If it's negative, it's below the x-axis. If it's positive, it's above. So if I plug in a point in between these 2 points and I get a negative, that means the graph is below the x-axis in this section here. And if I plug in a point to the right of this 0, I am going to get a positive because the graph is above the x-axis. If I plug in a point to the left of this 0, I am going to get a positive because the graph is above the x-axis. All right, so this is what it will look like graphically. In this section, it's positive. In this section, it's negative because it's below. And in this section, it's positive because it's above. All right, but again, we're not doing it graphically. We're just going to find these points algebraically and then plug in a number for this section, plug in a number for this section, and plug in a number for that section. All right, so we said the first step is to get 0 on one side. We have that. The second step is to factor it, and we have that as well. The third step is to find the actual zeros. So to find the zeros, you basically want to set the function equal to 0. All right, you don't necessarily have to write out this step because we can see it's the same as this right here, basically, other than the equal sign. But we want to find the zeros. We know anything times 0 equals 0. So if this equals 0, it works. And if this equals 0, it works. So either one of these can equal 0 for the whole thing to equal 0. All right, so this is x minus 4 equals 0. And we also want to do x plus 3 equals 0. All right, solving for x, if I add 4 to both sides, it cancels here, and x equals 4. Over here, if I do minus 3 on both sides, it cancels here, and x equals negative 3. All right, so those are the zeros. And really, you probably could have done that part in your head. You can see if you did 4 minus 4, you would get 0. Negative 3 plus 3, you would get 0. Okay, so you don't necessarily always have to write all that out. All right, next step is to plug in numbers in between the zeros. So just to illustrate, if you were on a number line here, and you had your zeros of 4 and negative 3, 4 would be on the right, and negative 3 would be on the left. And you want to select points that are in between those zeros, okay? Right here, it's less than 0. It doesn't equal 0. So the zeros are not going to be included, all right? So you can leave an open circle there if you like. And we choose points that are in between those zeros. Any point you want, just choose a number that's easy to plug into the expression. So to the left of negative 3, we can use negative 4. In between negative 3 and 4, we can use 0. And for the right of negative 4, we can use 5. Okay? You can choose any number you want as long as it falls on the correct spot on the number line. Okay? Right in here, I could choose 1, I could choose 2, I could choose 3, but 0 is probably the easiest. All right, so let's plug into the expression. First, we'll try negative 4 and see what happens. All right, so you can plug it into the original or factored form. In this case, that they're both factored. The original was already factored. All right, but I'm going to take this, and I'm going to try x equals negative 4. And all I want to see if it's positive or negative. Negative 4 in place of x minus 4, that's going to be a negative. And negative 4 in place of x plus 3, that's going to be negative 1, so that's a negative. Negative times negative is positive. So this section of the graph is positive. And now we're going to plug in 0. All right, so 0 minus 4, that's negative. 0 plus 3, that's positive. Negative times positive is negative. So this section of the graph is going to be negative. Here's positive, here's negative. The last number to plug in is 5. All right, so let's do x equals 5. 5 minus 4 is 1. That's positive. 5 plus 3 is 8. That's positive. Okay, I don't need the actual number. I just need the signs. Positive times positive is positive. So the final section of the graph is going to be positive. All right, and this right here, we can see this based on this inequality. Remember, it points to the less than side, so we want the part that is less than 0. Okay, what numbers are less than 0? Well, in other words, we want the negative. All right, the ones that are less than 0. So we are limiting ourselves to this section right in here. Okay, because this right here is the negative section. All right, so we're going to use interval notation. You start on the left. You start with negative 3. And the interval runs all the way to 4. All right, you go from left to right, negative 3 to 4. These are not coordinates. This just means it goes from -3 to 4. -3 is not included, so you use the rounded parenthesis. 4 is not included, you use the rounded parenthesis, and that's it. That's your answer. If the zeros were included, you would use a square bracket instead of a rounded parenthesis, but when it's not included, you use the rounded parenthesis. All right, so that is basically it for number 1. All right, please pause and try number 2. All right, so number 2 is basically the same thing. We already have the 0 on one side, and we can set each of these binomials equal to 0. Why is that? Because this could be 0 or this could be 0. When you multiply it, they're going to equal 0. All right, so we're going to find the zeros here. We don't need to factor. It's already factored. Plus 4 on both sides, and you get x equals 4. Minus 1 on both sides, you get x equals -1. So those are the zeros. All right. So if we were to do a number line here, we have 4 and -1. 4 is going to be on the right, and -1 is going to be on the left. Remember, the smaller numbers are on the left. All right, and now see this bar here, it could equal 0. So instead of using an open circle, I'm going to fill in the dot. All right, we have the zeros. You want to plug in the points in between. So anything less than -1, let's go with -2. Anything in between -1 and 4, let's go with 0. Anything greater than 4, let's try a 5. All right, so we can use this expression right here. Try -2. X equals -2. All right, at x equals -2, -2 minus 4 is -6. That's negative. -2 plus 1 is -1. That's negative. Negative times negative is positive. So this section right here is positive. Next up, we can try x equals 0. 0 minus 4 is negative. 0 plus 1 is positive. Negative times positive is negative. So this section by the 0 is negative, and then we're going to try 5. Five minus 4 is 1. That's positive. 5 plus 1 is 6. That's positive. Positive times positive is positive. So this section here is positive. Now, notice the inequality here. It is the part that is greater than 0. All right, if it's greater than 0, then we want the positive sections. Okay, so ignore the negative. The positive section is this part over here. And the other positive section is that part over there. All right, ignore the negative section. And remember, on the right, you have positive infinity. And on the left of the number line, you have negative infinity. All right. So remember, you go left to right. So on the left, it's negative infinity. And that runs all the way to -1. Always use rounded parenthesis for infinity. And for -1, since it includes the zeros because it has the equal to sign, you use the square bracket. And then for the next set of numbers, you write the U in union with, and keep going left to right. You go to the 4, and the 4 is included, so you use the square bracket. And the 4 goes to the right all the way to positive infinity. And again, for infinity, you always use the rounded. So that's it right there. All right, so number 3, that's almost the same thing. Only thing is you're going to get a fraction here. All right, but everything else works the same. You don't have to plug in a fraction. Number 4, you're just going to have more zeros to plug in. Number 9, same thing. You're just going to have more numbers to plug in. You're going to have more zeros, so you have to plug in the numbers in between. And same with number 10. It doesn't matter that it's squared. You can still plug in the numbers. Okay, but the ones you have to worry about here, yes, for 5, 6, 7, and 8, you have to factor them. All right, so let's go with number 5. Actually, let's try, let's try number 5. Let's try number 5. All right, so number 5, we already have 0 on one side. We're good there. And we can factor this. Because there's no coefficient in front of x squared, we just factor out 4, write out the factors, and see when we have a pair that adds 2 plus 5. So the factors for 4, 2 times 2, 4 times 1, and already I can see there is a pair of numbers that adds to 5. All right. So 2 binomials here. X squared was going to be x times x. And we're going to use the 4 and the 1. Positive 4 and positive 1. Okay. And that's going to be less than or equal to 0. All right. And finding the zeros. Either one of these can equal 0. So x plus 4 equals 0. X plus 1 equals 0. All right, really, you can do this part in your head. Minus 4 on both sides, x equals -4. Minus 1 on both sides, x equals -1. So those are the zeros. All right, so on number line, -4 and -1. -4 is going to be on the left because it's less than -1. You want to choose points that are in between. All right. What's a number that's less than -4? Well, you could use -5. What's a number in between -4 and -1? Well, you can choose -2, and greater than -1, I'm going to choose 0. All right, you can plug it into the original, but I always like to plug it into the factored form. All right, so x equals -5. -5 plus 4 is a negative. -5 plus 1 is a negative. Negative times negative is positive. That's this section right here. Next up, we'll try -2. -2 plus 4 is positive. -2 plus 1 is negative. Positive times negative is negative. So this section in here is negative. And the last section, we can try a 0. Zero plus 4 is positive. 0 plus 1 is positive. Positive times positive is positive. All right. So, based on the original question, we're looking for the part that is less than 0. Okay, in other words, the negative section. Now, since we want the negative section, we'll actually see this bar here. It also could equal 0. So the zeros here, we can fill in the dots because it's going to include the zeros. And we want the less than 0 part, which is the negative section right in here. All right, so this is the section. We start on the left at -4. And it runs to the right, stops at -1. It includes -4 and -1. So you want to use square brackets. And that's it. There's no infinity or negative or positive infinity. It does not include those sections. So that's basically it for number 5. All right, please pause and try number 8, and I'll give you a hint. You want to get 0 here, so start by doing minus 6x on both sides, because you have to have a 0 on one side to start. All right, so it's an inequality, minus 6x on both sides. I'm allowed to do that. Bring down your x squared. 16 minus 6, that's positive 10. Positive 24, bring that down. Keep the sign. 6x minus 6x is 0. By the way, you can do anything to either side that you could if this were an equal sign. Only thing is, if you multiply or divide both sides by a negative, then you would have to change the direction of the sign. Okay, but I don't think you're going to have to do that here. Anyhow, x squared, there's no coefficient. So we just want two numbers, find the factors of positive 24, and we can stop when we have a pair that adds to positive 10. All right, so for 24, you can do 8 times 3, but that adds to 11. You can do 6 times 4, and that adds to 10. So we're going to use the 6 and the 4. All right, x squared means we have to start with x times x, and we're going to use positive 6 and positive 4. And that's greater than 0. You can even write equal 0 at this point. It doesn't matter. All right, so anything times 0 is 0. So the x plus 6 could be 0, or the x plus 4 could be 0. If I do minus 6 on both sides, x is negative 6. Minus 4 on both sides, x is negative 4. In many cases, you can probably find the zeros in your head, all right, once you factor it, of course. So go to the number line and plug in the numbers that are in between. Negative 6 and negative 4. All right, you can choose anything you want as long as they're in between. So what's less than negative 6? Well, you could use negative 7. You could use negative 8. Doesn't matter. What's in between negative 6 and negative 4? Well, how about negative 5? What's greater than negative 4? How about a 0? All right. So you can plug it into the original, but I always go with the factored form. First one is x equals negative 8. Negative 8 plus 6 is negative. Negative 8 plus 4 is negative. Negative times negative is positive for this section here. Let's try negative 5. X equals negative 5. Negative 5 plus 6 is positive. Negative 5 plus 4 is negative. Positive times negative is negative. So that's for this section. Last section, we could try the x equals 0. 0 plus 6 is positive. 0 plus 4 is positive, and positive times positive is positive. Okay? Now, in many cases, the plus minus signs alternate, but that's not always going to be true. All right, so right here, we got to go to the part where we got 0 on one side. It's actually right here. All right, we're looking for the part that is greater than 0. All right, greater than 0. In other words, the positive section. So, there's no equal to, so we're not including the zeros. You can put an open circle there. All right, and the positive section is this section here. See the positive we wrote below? The positive section is this section here. All right, so we start at the left. Negative infinity, and it runs to negative 6. It does not include negative 6 or infinity. In union with negative 4, does not include negative 4, and it runs to the right all the way to positive infinity. So that's it.